Welcome, everyone. To today's deep dive, we're tackling something pretty heavy, but to be honest, something we can't really ignore. It's the state of our planet. You've sent us a ton of research and articles, and well, we're here to break it all down.
Yeah, distill it down to the most important points.
Right, the stuff you really need to know.
It's definitely a lot to unpack,
Yeah,
but we'll guide you through it.
absolutely. And I gotta say, one thing that really jumped out at me from this research was in 2023, global greenhouse gas emissions hit another record high.
Wow.
It's kind of like we're all supposed to be, cutting back, and then boom, record high emissions.
Yeah, I mean, it really underscores the urgency of the situation.
It does. And on top of that, there's this whole debate about whether the Earth is already overpopulated,
Right.
Like we're pushing past its limits.
Right, like we're exceeding its carrying capacity.
Exactly. It's kind of unsettling.
Yeah, it is. And, it highlights how interconnected all these issues really are. We're talking about climate change, ecological destruction, even things like disease outbreaks and inequality.
Right? It's all kind of woven together.
It is. It's like a web.
Okay. So let's try to untangle this web a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think a good place to start is with climate change.
Makes sense.
This research doesn't sugarcoat anything.
Yeah.
It's, lays out the facts pretty starkly.
Yeah, one number that really stood out to me was the 1.45 degrees Celsius of anthropogenic global heating we hit in 2023.
Wow.
Which is, how much hotter the planet is compared to pre-industrial levels.
And that's already having major consequences.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what's really hitting home for me with this research is how it connects climate change to stuff we're already seeing, and feeling. Like, we all remember those crazy heat waves a few years back, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, get this. Kids born today are likely to experience 7 times more heat waves than someone born in 1960.
It's a completely different world.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's not just heat waves, right? This IPCC report predicts all sorts of drastic shifts in the climate system.
Yeah, things like permafrost thawing at an accelerated rate, which releases more methane into the atmosphere, amplifying the warming.
So like a vicious cycle.
Exactly. And then there's ocean acidification.
Yeah.
Which, has a domino effect on entire marine ecosystems.
It's like one thing leads to another and then another.
Yeah, and it's all happening faster than we anticipated.
And here's the real kicker. Even if every single country stuck to their climate pledges from the Paris Agreement, it's still not enough to limit warming to 1.5 degrees.
It's a sobering thought.
So even the best case scenario is still pretty bad.
It raises serious questions about the effectiveness of some of these popular solutions.
Right, like are we really doing enough?
Well, the report dives into the limitations of net zero pledges, especially when you consider that many of them still rely heavily on fossil fuels.
It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline.
Exactly.
And what really gets me is the disparity in clean energy investment. The report points out that while developed nations are pouring money into clean energy, developing countries are kind of being left behind.
Right. It creates this kind of two-tiered system.
For a problem that affects everyone.
Exactly.
And on top of all that, global emissions are actually being underreported.
Which means the problem could be even worse than we think.
Yeah. It's like looking at your bank account and realizing you spent way more than you thought.
A very unpleasant surprise.
So it's clear that climate change is a huge threat. But the report doesn't stop there. It goes on to explain how this is just one piece of a much bigger environmental puzzle.
Right. It talks about this concept of ecological overshoot.
Overshoot. What's that?
Well, think of it this way. Imagine you have this giant forest, and every year you cut down more trees than you plant. Eventually, you're going to run out of trees. Right.
Right.
Well, that's essentially what we're doing with the Earth's resources.
Using them up faster than they can replenish.
Exactly. We're consuming more than the planet can sustain.
And we're seeing this overshoot in so many ways, from deforestation and species extinction to the state of our oceans.
It's pretty overwhelming to think about.
It is. The report uses some pretty shocking examples, too. For instance, did you know that over 35% of the world's fish stocks are already overfished?
It's a staggering statistic.
That's a huge chunk of our global food supply.
Right. What happens when those fish are gone?
It's a scary thought. And this whole idea that we can have endless economic growth while also protecting the environment, it's starting to feel like a fantasy.
It's a fundamental question we need to grapple with.
Because the two seem kind of incompatible.
They do.
Yeah.
And the report really challenges that assumption. It raises concerns about the current economic model, which relies on constantly taking from the earth without giving back.
Yeah, it's like we're running a marathon, but we never stop to refuel.
A recipe for disaster.
And it's not just about the environmental impact. The report highlights how it's often the most vulnerable communities, the ones who have contributed the least to these problems, who end up suffering the most.
Absolutely. It raises some serious ethical questions about who bears the brunt of environmental degradation.
So it's not just an environmental issue, it's a social justice issue, too.
Yeah, exactly. And it emphasizes the need for solutions that are equitable and benefit everyone, not just a select few.
Solutions that are fair and just for all.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the big picture, but let's get even more specific. This research dives deep into two things that are fundamental to our survival: food and water.
Right. The essentials.
This is where things get really personal,
Yeah.
affecting our everyday lives.
Absolutely. The report lays out how climate change, industrial agriculture, and a growing population are all putting a strain on our ability to feed and hydrate everyone.
And one stat that just blew my mind was that 94% of all mammal biomass on Earth is livestock.
Wow, that's incredible.
That's a crazy imbalance. And over half of agricultural expansion has come at the expense of forests.
Which are crucial for absorbing carbon dioxide.
Right. It's like this vicious cycle.
It is. And then there's the impact of animal agriculture, especially livestock.
Yeah.
The report details how it contributes to deforestation and greenhouse gas emissions.
And it's not just about the environment. The report also talks about the potential for food shortages.
Like, imagine a world where harvests of staple crops like rice and maize drop by 20 to 40%.
What would that mean for food prices and access?
Yeah, it's a critical question.
And it's not just about finding ways to produce more food.
Right. The report encourages us to look beyond those quick fixes.
And consider the long-term sustainability of our food systems.
Exactly.
So we're talking about a pretty dire situation here. But surely there are solutions. This research doesn't just leave us hanging with a bunch of scary stats and projections, does it?
No, not at all. While the report acknowledges the gravity of the situation, it also dedicates a lot of space to discussing potential solutions.
Okay, good, because I was starting to get a little depressed.
It emphasizes that it's not just about tweaking a few things.
We need bigger changes.
We need a systemic transformation.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of transformation are we talking about?
Well, it starts with understanding that this is a global problem that requires global solutions.
So no country can do this alone.
Exactly. We need cooperation and action on multiple fronts.
Like what?
Technological, political, economic, even cultural.
So it's about changing our mindsets, our values, even our behaviors.
It's about a fundamental shift in how we live and interact with the planet.
That sounds like a tall order.
It is, but the report argues that it's not only necessary, it's also possible.
Okay, I'm ready for a little bit of optimism.
Well, the report points to the growing global movements for climate action, social justice, and environmental protection as evidence that people are waking up to the interconnectedness of these crises and demanding change.
So you're saying there's hope?
There is. There's a growing awareness and a growing movement for change.
That's good to hear, because sometimes it feels like we're just headed for disaster.
I understand that feeling, but there are reasons to be hopeful. People are starting to realize that we have the power to create a different future.
A better future.
A more sustainable and just future for all.
All right, I like the sound of that. But before we dive into those potential solutions, I want to hear a little bit more about those abrupt changes you mentioned earlier.
Oh yeah, the tipping points.
Those sound pretty terrifying.
They are. The report warns that we're pushing the Earth's systems towards a point of instability.
And potentially past a point of no return.
Exactly. Remember those 15 tipping points identified by the IPCC?
Vaguely. Remind me.
Well, these are components of the Earth system, like major ice sheets and ocean currents that could undergo rapid, irreversible changes.
And those changes could trigger a cascade of consequences.
Like dominoes falling one after another.
So it's not just about the ice melting. It's about setting off a chain reaction that we can't control.
Exactly. And then there are the changes happening in our oceans. They're absorbing a huge amount of heat generated by human activity, leading to ocean heating, acidification, and deoxygenation.
And those changes threaten marine life, disrupt entire ecosystems, and ultimately impact our own food security.
It's a domino effect.
And the report mentions marine heat waves, too. I'm guessing that's not good news for coral reefs, which are already struggling.
You're right. The report predicts that over 98% of coral reefs could be facing bleaching-level thermal stress by 2050.
Wow.
And these reefs are incredibly important. They support a quarter of all marine species and provide food and livelihoods for millions of people.
So losing them would be devastating.
Absolutely. It would have a ripple effect throughout the entire ocean ecosystem.
It's like one thing leads to another and then another.
It's definitely complex.
But dizzying.
Yeah, scientists are still trying to fully grasp all the
Well,
intricacies.
the main message is clear. The stakes are incredibly high.
We're playing with fire and ice and water and entire ecosystems.
Okay, that's a lot to absorb. It seems like we've reached this critical point
A crossroads.
where we have to make some serious decisions about our future.
We do, and the choices we make now will have profound consequences for generations to come.
So where do we go from here?
That's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll delve into potential solutions from technological innovations to policy changes and cultural shifts.
Sounds good.
It's not just about what we need to do.
It's about how we can do it together.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've talked about the challenges, climate change, ecological overshoot, these potential tipping points. It's a lot to take in, but I'm curious to hear more about those potential solutions you mentioned. This report can't just leave us hanging with doom and gloom, can it?
No, not at all. In fact, it dedicates a significant portion to exploring pathways towards a more sustainable and just future.
Okay, that's a little reassuring.
Yeah.
So let's dive into these solutions. What are some of the key strategies the report proposes?
Well, one of the most prominent themes is this rapid transition away from fossil fuels.
Okay.
And it's not just about switching to renewable energy sources like solar and wind, though that's crucial. It's also about rethinking our transportation systems and improving energy efficiency across the board.
You know, it's interesting. The report actually mentions some encouraging trends on the renewable energy front. Yeah. Apparently, global installations of renewable energy jumped by nearly 50% in 2023.
That's right.
That's the fastest growth in decades.
It is. And advancements in technology are making renewables increasingly competitive.
This is becoming more affordable.
It is. Solar energy, for example, is on track to become the cheapest source of electricity in many regions by 2030.
Wow. So it sounds like there's some momentum building behind this shift to clean energy.
Yeah.
But what about, global energy consumption increasing? Wouldn't that kind of offset those gains?
Yeah, that's a valid concern. The report acknowledges that rising energy demand, driven by factors like population growth and industrialization, poses a significant challenge.
I could see that.
So it highlights the need not only for increased renewable energy production, but also for a decrease in overall energy consumption.
So we need to use less energy.
Exactly. It's about using energy more efficiently and rethinking our patterns of consumption.
Right. It goes back to that idea of ecological overshoot.
Sure.
Finding a way to live within our planetary boundaries. But what about those who are already struggling to meet their basic needs? How do we make sure that this transition to a sustainable future is fair and equitable for everyone?
Yeah, that's where the concept of a just transition comes in.
A just transition.
Yeah, the report stresses that solutions to climate change and other environmental issues should not come at the expense of social justice.
Oh, wow.
It needs to be a transition that benefits all communities, not just the wealthy or privileged.
Right. It's got to be fair.
Exactly. And that brings up another point. The report emphasizes the uneven distribution of clean energy investment.
Yeah, it highlights how, while advanced economies and China are leading the way, many developing nations are being left behind.
Right. And that could create even bigger global inequalities.
So we need to make sure everyone has access to clean energy technology.
Exactly. The report advocates for increased financial support and technology transfer to help developing countries leapfrog to cleaner, more sustainable development pathways.
Okay, so it's not just about switching to renewable energy. It's about making sure that switch is inclusive and doesn't exacerbate existing inequality.
Precisely. And that leads us to another crucial point, rethinking our current model of economic growth.
Because the way we measure growth now isn't really working.
Right. The report argues that the pursuit of endless growth measured solely by GDP is fundamentally incompatible with a healthy planet and a just society.
Yeah, I remember it mentions the need to reduce the production of superfluous and luxury commodities. That seems like a pretty radical departure from our current consumerist culture.
It is a significant shift, but one that the report argues is necessary.
Because our current system is unsustainable.
It is. It suggests moving away from the idea that material possessions are the primary measure of well-being.
And focusing on other things.
Exactly. Things like environmental health, social connection, and purpose.
So it's about shifting our priorities.
Yeah, redefining what it means to have a successful economy.
And acknowledging the value of things that aren't easily measured in dollars and cents.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that a healthy planet and a just society are the foundation for any kind of lasting prosperity.
Okay. So we've talked about clean energy, just transitions, and rethinking economic growth.
Yeah.
What other solutions does the report highlight?
Well, it emphasizes the crucial role of international cooperation and policy changes.
Makes sense.
The report makes it clear that no single nation can solve these challenges alone.
You need to work together.
Exactly. We need coordinated global action to address issues like climate change, biodiversity loss, and equitable access to resources.
Right. So we're all in this together.
We are. And the report also mentions something called Earth-centered governance.
Earth-centered governance. What's that?
Well, essentially, it's a shift in our approach to governance where we prioritize the health of the planet and the well-being of all living beings.
Okay.
It involves recognizing the interconnectedness of all life and making decisions that reflect this understanding.
So instead of just focusing on human needs,
We consider the needs of the entire planet.
that sounds like a pretty radical departure from the way things are currently done.
It is a bold vision, but the report argues that it's the only way to ensure a truly sustainable and just future.
I mean, it makes sense.
It does. It's about moving away from a human-centered worldview and embracing a more holistic perspective that recognizes the inherent value of nature and the importance of living in harmony with the planet.
So much of what we've discussed seems to hinge on this pretty massive cultural shift, a move away from our current values and behaviors.
You're right. The report acknowledges that technology and policy changes alone are not enough.
We need a change in mindset.
Exactly. We need a fundamental change in our relationship with the natural world and with each other. It's about shifting from a mindset of extraction and domination to one of reciprocity and stewardship.
So instead of just taking cripping, we need to start giving back.
Precisely.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What specific cultural shifts does the report advocate for?
Well, it talks about cultivating a sense of kinship with nature.
Kinship with nature.
Yeah. Moving away from the idea that humans are separate from and superior to the natural world.
Seeing ourselves as part of nature.
Exactly. Recognizing that we are part of an interconnected web of life and that our well-being is inextricably linked to the health of the planet.
And the report also mentions regenerative resource use. What does that mean exactly?
It means moving away from our current extractive model where we simply take resources from the earth without considering the consequences.
Okay.
And instead embracing practices that restore and regenerate the natural world.
So instead of depleting resources, we replenish them.
Exactly. Think of it as shifting from a take-make-waste linear economy to a more circular model where resources are used and reused waste is minimized and natural systems are regenerated.
So instead of just taking, we need to start giving back.
Precisely. This involves things like regenerative agriculture, which focuses on rebuilding soil health and sequestering carbon reforestation efforts to restore degraded forests and enhance biodiversity, and protecting and restoring natural ecosystems like wetlands and grasslands, which provide essential services like water filtration and flood control.
Okay. So it's about working with nature instead of against it.
Exactly. And the report also emphasizes the importance of reducing consumption and promoting sustainable lifestyles.
Yeah, that feels very relevant to our daily lives.
Yeah.
You know, it's about making conscious choices about what we buy, how we travel, what we eat, and how we dispose of waste.
It is. It's about shifting towards a more mindful and sustainable way of living.
Right. This doesn't mean we have to give up everything we enjoy,
No, not at all.
but it does mean being more thoughtful about our choices and considering the impact they have on the planet.
Exactly.
And there's also this strong emphasis on social justice and equity throughout the report. It seems like these issues are woven into every aspect of the proposed solutions.
Absolutely. The report argues that addressing social inequities is essential for achieving a sustainable future.
Because everyone deserves a chance to thrive.
Exactly. This involves promoting gender equality, empowering marginalized communities, and ensuring that everyone has access to essential resources like food, water, and education.
Right, because those who are already disadvantaged are often hit hardest by environmental problems.
Exactly. And the solutions need to address these injustices.
One example that stood out to me was the report's emphasis on investing in women's and girls' education as a way to reduce fertility rates and raise the standard of living.
Yeah. Empowering women and girls is not only a matter of social justice, it's also a crucial step towards achieving a more sustainable and equitable world.
It makes sense. When women and girls have more opportunities, they can contribute more fully to society.
Exactly. And it helps to create a more stable and prosperous world for everyone.
So it sounds like we need a pretty massive overhaul of our current systems, our economic systems, our governance systems, our value systems, in order to navigate these challenges and create a truly sustainable future.
It's a tall order, no doubt about it. But the report argues that this transformation is not only necessary, it's also possible.
Okay, so you're saying there's hope.
There is. The report points to the growing global movements for climate action, social justice, and environmental protection as evidence that people are waking up to the interconnectedness of these crises and demanding change.
So it's not just a bunch of experts and policymakers advocating for this change. It's a groundswell of people from all walks of life who are demanding a different future.
Exactly. We see it in the youth climate movement, which has mobilized millions of young people around the world to demand action on climate change. We see it in the push for a Green New Deal, which aims to address climate change and economic inequality simultaneously. And we see it in the rise of conscious consumerism, where people are increasingly making choices that align with their values and support businesses that are committed to sustainability and social responsibility.
That does offer a glimmer of hope. But what about those who are resistant to change? Those who are clinging to the old ways of doing things. How do we bring them along on this journey?
That's a challenging question, and one that there's no easy answer to. But I think one key is to focus on shared values and common ground.
Instead of just arguing.
Right. Instead of framing this as a battle between us and them, we need to find ways to connect with people on a deeper level to appeal to their values and aspirations.
So instead of getting bogged down in arguments about the science or the politics, we need to find ways to connect with people's hearts and minds.
Exactly. We need to show people that a sustainable future is not about sacrificing our way of life. It's about creating a better world for ourselves and future generations. It's about clean air and water, healthy food, vibrant communities, and a thriving planet. It's about ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to live a good life.
Okay, I like that approach, finding common ground and focusing on shared values. But how do we actually get from these big ideas to concrete action? What are the next steps?
Well, the report outlines a range of strategies from policy changes and economic incentives to community empowerment and cross-sector partnerships.
So there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly. We need a multifaceted approach that tackles these issues from multiple angles.
So can you give us some specific examples? What kind of policies or incentives are we talking about?
Sure. On the policy front, the report suggests things like implementing carbon pricing mechanisms, which put a price on carbon emissions, and encourage businesses to reduce their carbon footprint, phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, which currently prop up a polluting industry, and investing in public transportation systems to make it easier and more affordable for people to get around without relying on cars.
So making it easier to make sustainable choices.
Exactly. And then in terms of economic incentives, we're talking about things like tax breaks for green businesses, subsidies for renewable energy and carbon offset programs. These can help to level the playing field and make it more financially attractive for companies and individuals to invest in sustainable solutions.
So making it more affordable to go green.
Exactly.
The report also emphasizes the importance of individual action, even in the face of these large-scale systemic challenges. It seems to be saying that we all have a role to play, no matter how small.
Absolutely. Every choice we make, every action we take can contribute to a more sustainable and equitable future.
So even small changes can make a difference.
They can. And while individual actions alone may not solve the climate crisis or reverse ecological degradation, they can have a significant cumulative impact.
So it's about the power of collective action.
Exactly. Of many people making small changes that add up to a larger shift.
And it's not just about the direct impact of our actions, it's also about the ripple effects.
Right. The influence we have on our families, our friends, our communities, and even the businesses we patronize.
So you're talking about the power of setting an example.
Exactly. Of inspiring others to make changes in their own lives.
And that's where the concept of cultural shift comes in.
It is. Our individual choices can help to normalize sustainable behaviors, to create new social norms, and to ultimately shift the dominant paradigm.
So it's not just about what we do, it's about who we are and the message we send through our actions.
Precisely. Our individual choices can be a powerful form of activism, a way of voting with our dollars and our lifestyles for the world we want to create.
Okay, that makes sense. But I'm still wondering, what specific actions can individuals take that will have the biggest impact?
That's a great question, and one we'll explore in more detail in the next part of our dip dive.
All right, I'm ready for it.
We'll break down specific actions you can take in areas like consumption food choices, transportation, political engagement, and community involvement.
Sounds good. It feels like we've only scratched the surface of this massive and complex topic.
We have. But even just scratching the surface, we've uncovered some powerful insights and potential solutions. It's clear that we're at a critical juncture, but it's also clear that we have the knowledge, the tools, and the collective will to create a better future.
Okay, so we've spent the last two parts, laying out some pretty daunting challenges facing our planet. But we've also been exploring some big picture solutions.
Right.
But now I think it's time to really zoom in on what we can do as individuals.
Right, getting down to the practical stuff.
Exactly. Because, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of these global issues.
It is.
But this report really emphasizes the power of individual action.
It does. And for good reason. While systemic change is absolutely essential, our personal choices do matter.
Okay, so let's get practical.
Yeah.
What are some of the most impactful areas where individuals can actually make a difference?
Well, the report breaks it down into a few key areas. Consumption food choices, transportation, political engagement, and community involvement.
Yeah.
And each of these offers, opportunities to align our daily lives with a more sustainable future.
Okay, so let's start with consumption. I think this is where a lot of us might feel a bit uncomfortable, myself included. Our whole society is built around buying stuff.
It's true. Modern life encourages, a lot of unnecessary consumption. But the good news is we have the power to make different choices.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, a good starting point is to simply ask yourself a few questions before making a purchase.
Like what kinds of questions?
Like, do I really need this? Can I buy it secondhand? Can I repair something instead of replacing it?
Right, so it's about being more mindful, resisting those impulse buys, and kind of shifting away from that fast fashion mindset.
Exactly, where
Okay.
things are disposable.
Yeah, we need to move away from that. And beyond just buying less, we can also be more conscious about where we're spending our money.
Right. Choosing to support businesses that prioritize sustainability, fair labor practices, and ethical sourcing.
So it's like we're voting with our wallets, supporting the kind of world we want to see.
Exactly. And another area where our individual choices have a huge impact is food.
Yeah, this report really drove that home for me, especially when it comes to meat consumption.
Yeah, the environmental footprint of our diets is significant.
It is. So what are some practical steps we can take to make our diets more sustainable?
Well, one of the most impactful changes you can make is to reduce your consumption of animal products, particularly red meat.
So eating less meat.
Yeah, even incorporating 1 or 2 meatless meals per week can make a difference.
Okay. And for those times when we do eat meat, the report emphasizes the importance of choosing sustainably raised options.
Yes. Supporting local farmers who are using practices that minimize environmental impact.
And let's not forget about food waste.
Oh, yeah.
That's a big one.
The report highlighted how much perfectly good food just gets thrown away every year.
It's staggering.
It is. We can all do our part by being more mindful about what we buy, using up leftovers, and composting food scraps.
All right.
Okay. So we've tackled consumption and food. What about transportation? I know that's a major source of emissions.
It is. The report encourages us to think about how we get around and to prioritize sustainable options whenever possible.
So like walking, biking, public transportation.
Exactly. Those are great alternatives to driving alone in a car.
And for those who do need a car, electric vehicles and hybrids are becoming increasingly viable options,
They are, and the technology is constantly improving.
making them more accessible and affordable.
Exactly. And when it comes to longer distances, choosing train travel over flying whenever possible can significantly reduce your carbon footprint.
So it's about being more intentional with our travel choices.
Right. Recognizing that convenience often comes with an environmental cost.
Yeah. But individual actions can only take us so far, right? We need systemic change, too. Absolutely. That's why political engagement is so crucial.
Voting,
Contacting our elected officials.
letting them know these issues are important to us.
Exactly. And supporting organizations that are advocating for policy changes.
So it's about making our voices heard and holding our leaders accountable.
Yes, for creating a more sustainable future.
And finally, let's not underestimate the power of community involvement.
Oh, absolutely. Getting involved at a local level can have a ripple effect that extends far beyond our immediate surroundings.
Okay, so what are some ways people can get involved in their communities?
There are so many options. You could join a local environmental group, volunteer at a community garden, or simply start a conversation about sustainability with your neighbors.
Right, it's about coming together
Yeah.
to create change.
Exactly. Recognizing that we're all in this together.
And remember, individual action isn't just about making changes in your own life. It's also about inspiring others, shifting the culture, and contributing to that collective movement towards a more sustainable and just future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So, after this deep dive, I'm left with kind of a mix of emotions, concern about the challenges we face, but also a sense of hope and empowerment, knowing that there are things we can do,
That's the spirit.
both individually and collectively, to create a better future.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed,
Yeah.
but we have a choice. We can either succumb to despair or choose to act.
I choose to act.
And every action, no matter how small, is a step in the right direction.
That's a good point. So for our listeners who are feeling inspired and want to take that first step,
Yeah.
what would you suggest they do right now?
I would say pick one area that resonates with you, whether it's consumption, food choices,
Yes.
transportation, political engagement, or community involvement, and commit to making one small change this week. It doesn't have to be a huge leap, just one step forward.
Okay.
And then share that action with someone else. Tell a friend, post about it online, start a conversation, inspire others to do the same.
That's a great call to action. Remember, change starts with each one of us. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Earth at Risk. It's been dense but incredibly important. And to our listeners, we hope this has left you feeling informed, inspired, and ready to be part of the solution.